It is my pleasure to introduce one who has been among us the last 2.5 days. Judith Little is from the University of California, Berkeley, and she's in the School of Education. And she's here because we're not brave enough to help us tackle all those things on the board and to talk about different ways that we can think about that. So thank you, Judith.
All right. So I'm Judith Warren Little, and in your bio packet, it says that I'm a professor at the University of California, Berkeley, but I've actually changed identity, and I'm not sure. We had a little bio cross in the ozone or something, and so I'm now positioned as one of the figures in the organizational and institutional landscape that you're encountering. I'm a dean. I've gone to the dark side. There's a story that I have to tell you first about being a dean. 20 years ago, I served as associate dean for a while, and that's a rotating position. It's not a career move in our institution anyway. So I served as associate dean for 2 or 3 years, and I ran into Larry Cuban at a conference. And some of you may know Larry's work. He actually writes, he's got a classic book called How Teachers Taught that's about the failures of technology in education and how things get routinized and come and go and things remain the same. But I ran into Larry at a conference, and I had just agreed to serve as associate dean, and he said, congratulations, I hear you're associate dean. And I know Larry, so I looked at Larry and I said, mm-hmm. And he said, you know what the definition of an associate dean is, don't you? No, it's a mouse in training to be a rat. So, so here I am, I'm the rat. But I'm now someone who can help, my view of this is I can help promote ideas, I can help secure resources on the one hand, or I can kill good ideas through sheer inattention, through indifference, through succumbing to other people's opposition. And I can do it by failing to figure out with my faculty how to navigate controversy and conflict. So one of the things that I would urge you to think about doing is about not only how we're positioned here in this room, but how everyone around you is positioned to help you navigate the change that you want and to really think strategically about that. So by way of preface, we've talked about, and you see here we are, changing in a moment of paradigmatic change. We know that universities, despite the fact they're supposed to be home to creativity, curiosity, knowledge building, are very conservative institutions. They change slowly. There's a wonderful old joke about the hunters and gatherers forming a university. So there they were, hunting and gathering, and they wanted to really preserve the expertise and extend it and be better at hunting and gathering, so they form a university. Years go by, we develop settled agriculture. The parents start to complain that their kids are coming home with skills for hunting and gathering, so they complain to the university administration, who says, but we teach the classics. So universities are slow to change, but they are changing, and I see the signs all around me. And the signs come in funny, bubbling up, percolating kinds of ways. And so this is one of those percolating moments that's probably not very visible to the rest of your institution right now. And so again, another strategic choice is about how visible to make it and under what conditions and with whom. I need more than one hand here. All right. So let's see. So I want to give us, I went to an unconference a week or so ago. Anybody been to an unconference so far? A couple of the Googlers have been to an unconference. So I went to an unconference. It was called EduCamp at Berkeley. And it was about the new ways in which technology is transforming and supporting learning. And some of the ways that were shared at the unconference weren't all that transformational, frankly. They were technology in the aid of conventional teaching, but some of them were more transformational. And what struck me about the event was the very fact of it, that it came to my attention mainly because someone who I'm networked with at the university in the business school emailed to ask if we wanted to co-sponsor it. And I said, what is it? So I went and attended part of it, and it was just one of those events that had a kind of underground feel, and you'll see a little bit more of that later. Meanwhile, Berkeley is also developing through its educational technology services what they're calling an active learning test kitchen. A what? So things are bubbling up in odd ways, and they're not coming as major university initiatives. So I'm wondering how we can think about the projects that you've developed here today in terms of their prospects for propelling rather than just reacting to the changes that we see all around us out in the society. In the last couple of days, we've heard various kinds of testimony about the way that you think you're positioned and whether you're going to be celebrated or punished for the kind of work that you're undertaking here. And so I want to actually invite that discussion in a more systematic way here over the next hour. And to do that, I want to just lay out a few kind of organizing terms, ideas that we might have in play as we have that discussion. This is the unframework. Some of you, especially if you're in schools of education, have probably been to trainings on managing change, and you've been introduced to frameworks, to processes, and so forth for thinking about change. This isn't that. But certainly, I would invite any of you who've done that or read about change to bring any conceptual tools or skills or processes that you might have into your conversations. But this isn't that. This is the sort of framework to go with the unconference. And I do that because most of the change literature in education has arisen out of situations where you've got kind of what I call the policy footprint. Somebody's trying to implement a policy. It was framed at the top. You're at the bottom. Somebody wants you to implement it. So they work about buy-in. They invite kind of mutual adaptation. There's all this stuff about stakeholders. This isn't that kind of initiative of an innovation developed elsewhere and visited upon you. What we're trying to do is incite, invite, propel small actions into some kind of big movement. And so I'm going to start with, I'm just going to give a few kind of ideas or vocabulary terms that we might have in play. So one of them has to do with storylines and logics. There's a development in sociology, the kind of new institutionalism that talks about the way in which we're all surrounded by these big institutional logics that shape the way we see the world. And we've talked about some of those today, and when you have conversations on your campuses, people are basically expressing what amounts to big logics that play out in day-to-day conversation in taken for granted ways that's hard for us to recognize. So what I want to invite is that we just be sensitized more deliberately and analytically to the storylines as we hear them. One of them, for example, just to give you an example, kindergarten. What's the nature of kindergarten? For decades, even really since its inception, there's always been a tension between developmental and academic purposes of kindergarten. And if you interview teachers right now, they'll say kindergarten's the new first grade. It's become so highly academicized, and it's true. I have a former student who did her dissertation on this question, and there's plentiful evidence that the nature of kindergarten has changed far more toward the academic end. We're likely to attribute that to changes in accountability policies and how it's driving testing and so forth. But what Jen Russell found in her archival work in newspapers and going back through professional association records and other kinds of artifacts was that parent pressure, middle-class parents, starting back in the 60s and 70s, started to shift the nature of kindergarten and what it's for. This is a picture, I don't know the date on this picture, but look at the computers. So first of all, there are computers, and second, they're old. So kindergarten, the whole institutional storyline about kindergarten has changed. So we can watch for our storylines. Second, think about our location in terms not just of organizations, but of networks and social movements, right? So we've talked about where we are in the formal organization in the university and where the power dynamics are, and whether you're in many institutions, the technology that's taught to teachers is taught in standalone courses by temporary faculty. All right, now there's an organizational location for you. It's vulnerable and it's marginalized. For those of you who are doing the technology work, who are ladder faculty, especially tenured faculty, that's a very different organizational position to be operating from. So where are we all as we develop these projects? By the way, I went looking online for an organizational chart for universities, and it stops at the top. The rest of us aren't even here. But the more important thing is the organizational culture and political organization, all right? So what are the norms around experimentation in the place where you live? Is it celebrated? Is it even visible? So I have an assistant professor who's now coming up for tenure who teaches in our Cal Teach program for math and science undergraduate, similar to the programs you all have. And ordinarily, no one would even know what he's doing in that class, much less think it's very important that he's teaching it. But I found it interesting that he invited me to come visit that class twice this year, once when he had Sally Ride as a visitor. I thought that was pretty good. He snagged Sally Ride. But the second time was when teams of students were sharing their robotics projects and then having a conversation about what that would mean for them as teachers. So he's now made this, he's treated it as culturally important, and he's made it visible to me, and I can make it visible to others. But then there's the network organization, not just the formal organization, and this is a network in formation. The EduCamp that I went to speaks to network relationships, not formal organizations. So I was surprised to look at the Berkeley homepage. It happens to be my default page on my web browser. I looked at the web page yesterday, and right there in the center, you can see Cal EduCamp explores the nexus of technology and teaching. So it was a little underground event. I went to it. I have no idea who all those people were. One of the people presenting was a professor from the English department on how she uses technology. There was someone from Stanford being virtually present. There were people, you know, we weren't wearing organizational name tags that said professor, English department, or chair something, or student. It was just a group of people coming together with a shared interest in technology, and it's now made the front page of the Berkeley website. So networks have a way of making visible stuff that often is invisible in the formal structure. Routines. Alfred yesterday, in his talk, commented on some of those words that we often think of as being negative words or not very helpful: replication, routine. I'm particularly fond of routines. I think routines get us a long distance. I think instructional routines are really undervalued. Instructional routines can be containers in which you can do many wonderful things. There's a Bruno Latour, who studies the work of scientists, originally introduced the distinction between ostensive characteristics of routines, the kind of formal structural features of them, and the performative aspects, what actually happens on the ground. And it's in that relationship between the ostensive and the performative that you have both the kind of promise of stability and predictability and the seeds of possibility and change. So if we think about routines as having possibility for us, and the projects that you're inventing, part of making them go viral in a way is giving them, oddly enough, paradoxically enough, a routinized character. So I'm sure Google has its routines in which invention can happen. Schools have started introducing organizational routines like the 5-week assessment to displace old routines. Flipping the classroom, there'd be a whole analysis here to think what routines are being disrupted and replace, because anytime you introduce a new routine or try and modify routine, you're bumping up against old routines. So what are those? So one of the routines we're really good at in the world is lining up. All right, so think of all of the ways in which you count on the existence of a line. And if you've ever traveled to a country where lines don't happen, clumps happen, you're completely uncertain how to behave. But if there's a line, then you get to figure out the way the norms of lines work in that place. And there are all kinds of creative possibilities for lines. Okay, one of my favorite notions is ooze. I'm down to the wire here. People have thought about how they're going to disseminate the Google on the road thing, how you're going to disseminate what you're doing, and there are conventional ways of thinking about disseminate. I trace my use of the word ooze to a high school teacher, high school social studies teacher that I knew years ago. I think she's retired now. But much like Esther, she gave over ownership in the classroom to her students, and her students, this is a history class, and they produced all kinds of magazines. This is before the days of all the online stuff. This goes back, she was working in the 70s and 80s, and her kids really produced all kinds of stuff, and they had an author's wall in the classroom so that the authority of text was challenged. And Sue just did what she was doing, and she started this whole author's wall and the products, the magazines, and she started to notice similar kinds of products being created in other classrooms. There was no formal professional development. What she discovered is her kids' enthusiasm. The kids were literally carrying projects from one classroom to another, and teachers say, "What's that?" And so she coined the term ooze to explain what had happened in her school as kids carried ideas to other locations. So think ooze rather than dissemination, all right? And YouTube as a phenomenon, think back to when you first saw YouTube and how it's become a mechanism for going viral, for good or for ill. So we want to leave you with, I want to leave you with, and I'm exactly at 0 here, 3 organizing questions. And Peter's going to help me actually think about how we'll use time here. But the first question, what about your proposal represents a change in thinking and practice in your department, your program, your institution, the occupation altogether, and how much of a change is this? And then how does it bump up against existing norms, values, routines, and so forth, and structures? How do you envision that your ideas and or practices could travel and gain hold? Who will be excited? Who will be skeptical, concerned, opposed? And what are the conversations you can imagine? Think the dialogue. And finally, this takes you out of your own project for the moment, and as a way to help you think about that, think about some change that you've actually observed that entails the transformative uses of technology, and can you think of one in your university? That actually could be a stretch in some cases. And what story can you tell about how that change came about? Are there lessons that would help us here? As you tell those stories, no doubt one of the parts of those stories is overcoming obstacles, but to the extent possible, can we focus on how things actually got where they were going? Although it might also be interested in thinking about changes that you saw as promising that got stalled. So, Peter. Yeah, I'll come back there.
So if you just stay here a moment, Julie, just make sure.
You got one of these? Yeah, we'll put the questions back up in a second.
First question is there any question about the questions? Have you understood what's being asked? Is that all okay? No?
All right, so.
Oh, sure, you're raising a hand?
Oops.
Half raise a hand.
Oops, I blew it. Hold on. Hold on. Okay.
Okay, so we've got pink post-it notes on the tables that relate to questions that the rest of the group have asked each of you, okay? We need to find some really efficient way of distributing those so that you've got them when you start the session. So that's all part of the material. We've got the flip charts over there, and you've got the post-it notes on your table. I'm just thinking, what's going to be the simplest way we can transfer that with the minimum fuss?
Peter, if I could make a suggestion?
Yes.
If the first part of this is going to be a discussion within the project groups about, let's see, their own. So they just, maybe we wait to distribute them until we're ready to talk across projects?
We can do that. Okay, I think with the time available.
Okay.
Well, my sense was that the comments feed into this.
Yeah.
That's why we wanted to do it. Please.
So why don't you go and put your Post-its up on the numbers that you've You can go ahead as I'm talking. And then also, when we're done with that, bring back your sheet to your table so that you have your sheet and you have your pad.
Great.
Okay?